And he wondered whether African American students' awareness that there are stereotypes in this culture about differential intellectual ability by race might lead African American students to perform less well, even though they have equal ability, thus reinforcing the stereotype. For example, if you hold SAT score and GPA constant, so you control, you even the playing field in terms of these measures of intelligence, African American students are still more likely to drop out of college than are Caucasian students. At the same SAT score and same GPA, same background, the African American student is more likely to drop out than is the Caucasian student. What Steele wondered was, everybody does badly on some exams. Everybody has some bad moments in their academic lives. And so, but for a Caucasian student, Steele reasoned, it's bad, but it doesn't have any extra baggage than just like, well, I did badly. But for an African American student aware that there are negative intelligence stereotypes about their group within the culture they live in, Steele thought perhaps that same one instance of poor performance ends up carrying more weight and having more baggage, because then the individual might feel like they are supporting or affirming this negative stereotype about that group. And so this got Steele thinking about the ways in which our performance could become more negative and, in a sense, stereotype supporting as a function of our awareness of the stereotype. So these are really self-fulfilling prophecy effects. Here's a basic model that Steele proposes. The first component is that stereotypes are, as he called it, in the air. When you're in a culture, you know what the stereotypes are. Even if you don't buy them, you don't believe them, you are aware of what the prominent stereotypes are in your culture. And especially if you're a member of a group that's targeted by a stereotype, you are very aware of the stereotypes about your group. They're just around. They're sort of out there in the air. But sometimes things will happen that will activate the stereotype. Something will happen in a situation that sort of says, hey, stereotype relevant here. And so if you are a member of a group that's stereotyped, you're aware of the stereotype, something happens in a situation to make you think, hey, this stereotype is relevant in the situation, what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a self-fulfilling prophecy where your behavior ends up supporting the stereotype because the fact that you are aware that there's a relevant stereotype about your group leads you to experience anxiety and worry. And the anxiety and worry impairs your performance, thereby leading to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's say, as Steele did when he was developing this model, you're an African-American student, you're aware that there are stereotypes in our culture about differential intelligence as a function of race. Something happens, like you do badly on a test, or you're told the test is very diagnostic of your intelligence, that's going to say, hey, stereotype relevant here, and then you're going to start to worry. You're going to start to think, well, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to support the stereotype? Is my behavior going to indirectly give evidence for the stereotype? That's going to make you worried. That's going to make you anxious. And what happens when you're worried and anxious about it? You focus less on your performance. You're not able to perform as well. The anxiety and the worry impair your performance. And you do less well on the IQ test. You do less well on the SAT. You do less well on the exam. And then what you have is self-fulfilling prophecy. You're behaving in line with the stereotypes, even though the stereotype may not be true of you in terms of your abilities, but the anxiety and worry that comes from being aware that there's a stereotype there relevant to you actually impairs your performance. You end up behaving in line with the stereotypes. And so critically, Steele believed that this is a way of explaining differences in groups of performance, even when ability was equal. Having groups of equal ability end up having different performance. Well, if one of those groups, despite their equal ability, has a stereotype about them their performance in the situation will be impaired by their anxiety and worry about supporting the stereotype, and then their outcome will be impaired, and that does actually support the stereotype, even though in reality the stereotype is not true, the ability is equal. So that's the basic model. One varying from anecdotal kind of evidence, then we'll talk about a number of studies to try to test different components of the model. Steele writes about it in Japan. There's a particular stigmatized minority group that in school do worse than other groups. However, it's been documented that when members of those groups come to the United States, where they're no longer the target of stigma, they actually perform equally well to other Japanese immigrants in the United States school system. So the difference between members of this group and the rest of the Japanese population that exists in Japan, where they're stigmatized, there's a difference, but they come to the States where the stigma is not there and the difference is eliminated. So that suggests that the ability is equal if their performance in the States is similar, but that somehow the stigma that they experience in Japan has a negative influence on their performance. We're going to talk about, I think, 4 different studies that Steele and colleagues have done to test components of the theory. What you will see is that none of the studies by themselves test the entirety of the theory. Each of them tests one component. That said, even though there's not one study that tests the whole theory, I think you'll see when you put them together, they do make for a compelling package of studies suggesting ways in which stereotypes influence performance even when ability is equal. And so that's really the key take-home message. Self-fulfilling prophecy effects are there to explain group differences in performance when ability is equal. All of these studies generally have the same method. They put subjects into situations where, in some cases, they're going to believe that their performance on something is really meaningful. That's going to activate this, in theory, activate the stereotype, and then they're going to look for differences in performance. Yeah. Yes, that's a great question. We're going to talk about it on Wednesday. You'll see that it does work. It sort of raises questions about some parts of the model, but it does actually work in a positive direction. We'll come back. So the subjects in these studies, Steele is a professor at Stanford. All the studies use Stanford undergraduates, so I'm not just saying this because I was one of them, but they're giving students like SAT and GRE type questions. It's obviously a sample that's pretty smart to begin with. And in all studies, the subjects they're not just Stanford undergrads, they're in general half Caucasian Stanford undergrads and half African American Stanford undergrads. So let me talk about one study now, and we'll pick up with this on Wednesday. This is really the study that got the theory famous. It's really, I think, the most famous study still for the whole theory. Subjects are all Stanford undergrads, half African American, half Caucasian. They're given verbal questions from the GRE exam. So they're difficult questions, but they're actually taken from the real GRE. There are 2 conditions. The independent variable is whether the stereotype of racial differences in performance is primed or not. If you're randomly assigned a stereotype prime condition, before doing the questions, you're told this test is highly diagnostic